Some of the most vivid memories I have of growing up, practically glued to my carpet in front of my CRT TV, is the routine that would play out when putting in my VHS copy of Star Wars: The Phantom Menace. Most of the movie I would watch in fast forward, as 4-year-old Mason didn't have much patience for anything that wasn't two major sequences that took place in George Lucas's first entry into the prequel trilogy. I would sit cross-legged on the carpet and stare at the scenes rapidly going by, then time my pressing of the play button on the VCR to the beginning of the pod race on Tatooine, and after that was over, I'd go straight to this moment right here. I've probably mentioned this before at some point on this channel, but I can't remember the first time I ever watched a Star Wars movie. This franchise has just always been a presence in my life. Darth Vader was my yearly Halloween costume. I prematurely killed my original trilogy box set by playing it too many times. And I grew up in what many consider to be the best time to be a Star Wars kid. The prequels were coming out every few years. The origins of Vader were playing out before our very eyes. Things that Obi-Wan had only mentioned in passing to Luke were now being brought vividly to life with new filmmaking techniques that would change the medium for the rest of time. Most importantly for many, myself included, this universe that some of us had only been made aware of by the rewatches our parents would let us in on was expanding, growing larger and larger with each entry. I first watched The Phantom Menace in the early 2000s, and by this point, Star Wars was already an older property, having been released in the 1970s, but it found a way to be new again. New planets, new alien species, new concepts added to the Force. And I don't think anything emphasized just how new Star Wars was becoming than when this devil-looking horned beast of a character cloaked in all black ignited a second blade on his fucking lightsaber. In a duel the likes of which this franchise had never seen before, I found a new obsession. Move over, Darth Vader. 4-year-old Mason wanted to be Darth Maul from now on. Now, if we go by just his appearance in The Phantom Menace, my fanboy obsession with this character was definitely more one born out of style over substance. Darth Maul didn't have the character depth of Vader or the memorable lines of Yoda and Obi-Wan. What he did have, however, was an undeniable presence, an element to an antagonist that I've discussed before as being vital to making them more memorable, and boy was Darth Maul. Growing up on the original trilogy, the presence that Vader's strong silhouette and breathing sound had before he ever spoke a single line was something I originally thought couldn't be matched, and I think George Lucas knew that too. You don't try and outdo Vader, you do something completely different. Where Vader lacked humanity by being placed behind a mechanical mask, Darth Maul was entirely alien. The red and black colors, the horns, it all came from George Lucas asking concept artist Ian McCaig to literally draw him his worst nightmare. The Sith warrior both looked vicious and fought viciously. There was a speed and ferocity to his movements in lightsaber combat that had never been filmed before. It introduced fans to this era of more highly trained Force wielders, with choreography of the climactic fight and all the fights of the prequel trilogy being the incredible work of Nick Gillard. The choreography was carefully practiced for months and flawlessly executed by actors Liam Neeson and Ewan McGregor alongside the actor who would bring Darth Maul to life, Scottish stunt performer Ray Park. Even though his very few lines were ultimately dubbed over by another actor, Ray Park deserves a lot of credit for his physical performance as this character. There's an intensity that he brings to every scene, specifically in those yellow eyes. I also love the little touches, like when he bares his teeth like a wild animal, and when he shows off this cocky smile as he paces back and forth. Just from the way he conducts himself, we can tell that Darth Maul is highly skilled and knows that he is. He's facing off against 2 Jedi at once, and it doesn't even look like he's breaking a sweat. It also helps that he's backed up by John Williams' musical score. Duel of the Fates is Darth Maul's theme song, and we all know it. That epic choir just adds so much to this already amazing lightsaber war. Darth Maul punishes these two characters, specifically Obi-Wan, for the entire duel, and when he kills Qui-Gon, unleashes this burst of fury from Obi-Wan that just may be the best choreographed moment in the entire movie. It's not just a testament to the skill of Ray Park, but also Ewan McGregor, who clearly put in the work to display the skills of the great Jedi Master at a young age. When all was said and done and the new Sith was vanquished, even his death being one of the most graphic in the series at the time, Darth Maul left a legacy on this series with a relatively short amount of screen time and only 2 lines of dialogue. Similar to Vader so many years ago, Darth Maul instantly became an icon to so many young fans like myself. However, the positive reaction that I and so many around my age had was not shared with some fans. If you go back and watch the original trailers for The Phantom Menace, Darth Maul is featured prominently. No doubt this helped to build up hype around him, but to some fans it led to serious disappointment when they found out that all of his lines and scenes were featured in the marketing. Introducing such a badass new Sith and immediately killing him off in the same film with no real character development was a bit of a waste to a lot of fans. Personally, I never felt that way, but it was clear that the popularity of Darth Maul grew stronger than even Lucas could have anticipated. It's no mystery as to why he was included in so many Star Wars video games, books, and comics. One comic series that I remember reading was the Star Wars Tales series by Dark Horse. There were some really cool stories where in one, Darth Maul was resurrected to fight Vader, and he appeared as a hologram that attacked Luke in another. In the first LEGO Star Wars game, I would always replay the Duel of the Fates level over and over just to feel like I was participating in that part of the film. In the 2008 video game, The Force Unleashed, there was this awesome sequence where Proxy transformed into Darth Maul and you had to fight him as a boss. I bring all of this stuff up because there was a persistence amongst fans that Darth Maul needed to continue, to keep making appearances outside of the films to make up for that perceived wasted potential in The Phantom Menace. The same year that The Force Unleashed was released, the animated television series Star Wars The Clone Wars premiered, and it was in this series that George Lucas would task Dave Filoni with officially bringing Darth Maul back to life. From the outset, it seems like a pretty silly idea to bring someone back who was cut in half and dropped down a pit back to life with robot legs. This could have been very goofy if it wasn't handled just right. My thoughts on bringing back dead characters is that you have to have something interesting to do with them to justify bringing them back. That's especially true for Maul, considering just how much effort it took for Obi-Wan to best him. His vanquishing of Maul was the catalyst for him to be given the rank of Master after all. You don't want to undo all of that character work done for Obi-Wan just to bring back a cool-looking bad guy. So, how do you bring Darth Maul back to life? I'm not going to literally answer that question and go scene by scene with this character. If you want all the details of how he was resurrected, I highly recommend you watch The Clone Wars and Rebels. I'm talking from a writing standpoint. How do you bring back Maul in a way that is interesting? And even greater question, did the writers of this series justify bringing back Maul? Yes. Yes, they did. Not only did they justify his return to the series, but they actually elevated this character to one of the absolute best of the entire Star Wars canon. The idea to bring back Maul was very spur of the moment, with George Lucas literally turning to Dave Filoni and just suggesting that they bring him back for the series. When Dave responded to George that he cut the character in half and asked him how in the hell they were supposed to do that, George simply answered, "Figure it out." So they did. Rewatching The Phantom Menace, the writers for The Clone Wars were able to pick up on some of the little bits of personality that Ray Park gave the character in his brief appearance, and use it to flesh him out into a full character. His skill in combat fit right in with the series' crazily choreographed lightsaber fights. The little smiles from Park showed a bit of pride that was incorporated. But the most important element that was written into Maul's personality was one inspired from outside of The Phantom Menace: the fan reaction. Fans saw Maul as wasted potential, so they addressed that by writing it into his character and motivations. When Maul returns, he laments that he was meant for a greater purpose and cast aside before he ever had the chance to fulfill it. This resentment at how he was treated influences nearly every choice that he makes for the rest of his appearances in the series. His never-ending quest for revenge is born from his desire to live up to what he knows he's capable of. And I'm going to explore that much further, but there's one final element that they needed to bring Maul back. They had to give him a voice. In The Phantom Menace, Ray Park's physical performance was dubbed over by Peter Sarah. This actor, whose name I'm not going to butcher, and only for a few lines of dialogue. For The Clone Wars, the creators turned to an actor who was no stranger to the Star Wars expanded universe. In that Force Unleashed game that I was talking about earlier, you play as Darth Vader's secret apprentice, Galen Merrick, codenamed Starkiller. Ironic that he would fight a sort of Darth Maul in the game, as the actor whose likeness and voice was used to bring Starkiller to life was the same actor who would resurrect Maul, the amazing Sam Witwer. Witwer's performance works well enough as a sound-alike actor for the actor in The Phantom Menace, but this isn't a guy who just goes halfway. Not only is Sam Witwer a massive Star Wars fan, he's an incredible actor who just goes for it in everything he's in, and Maul is no exception. He took the deep, cold voice of film Maul and, after assessing the mental state of the character when we find him in Clone Wars, added a certain shakiness to it. This is a version of Maul that has been beaten, broken, and dragged back into a world that didn't want him against his will. Witwer's performance reflects that. The way he talks, it's almost like at any minute he could burst into tears or start screaming at the top of his lungs. All that anger barely contained in the dialogue.
You cannot imagine the depths I would go to stay alive, fueled by my singular hatred for you.
When we find Maul, he's literally on a garbage planet. He's been discarded after the events on Naboo, reduced to an animalistic state before being restored with the help of his brother, Savage. From this point, in his first appearances, it's all about revenge on Kenobi. We get the rage on full display, with Maul looking like a demon emerging from the fires of hell. This is the Maul we know and love. Another Jedi Master even dies while he fights Kenobi, just like before. Where I think they really start to do some interesting things with this character is in the episodes following his initial quest for revenge against Kenobi. It's on Mandalore where we really get to see the true power of Maul, a side of him we had not yet seen, his cunning. By undermining Pre Vizsla, organizing a collective of crime syndicates, and installing his own political puppet on the planet, Maul takes over the planet of Mandalore.
I claim this sword, and my rightful place as leader!
Maul has a desire to rule over others, to be a master to an apprentice. It's an obsession that comes from only ever amounting to being the underling to a more powerful being. This is why he treats his brother the way that he does, referring to him as apprentice rather than by name or brother. The relationship between Maul and Savage is one that is, at times, kind of abusive, which only makes sense because that's the only way that Maul has ever known.
And I shall complete your training, not as your brother, but as your master.
Ultimately, Maul is a character that is lost. He has no purpose in this universe. He's already played his part in Palpatine's scheme to control the war and eventually rule the galaxy. He knows he'll never be welcomed back by his former master, so when he first returns, his focus is simply revenge on the Jedi who he believes took everything from him. Revenge is his sole motivator, and it's born out of his hatred. Maul literally survived the most gruesome death we had seen in Star Wars up to that point by hating Obi-Wan. There are many moments in the Star Wars universe where we see a dark side user attempt to goad their opponent into giving in to their hatred.
I sense great fear in you, Skywalker. You have hate, you have anger, but you don't use them.
Now, release your anger. Only your hatred can destroy me.
Strike me down with all of your hatred, and your journey towards the dark side will be complete.
Maul is just another great example of what happens when a character in this universe lets themselves be completely consumed by hate. There's this amazing edit that I'm sure many of you have seen, but in case you haven't, it's titled Maul Hatred. And not only is it a great tribute to the character, but it perfectly gets across everything that I'm talking about here. Besides being the personification of hatred, Maul is also the greatest example of a victim of how the Sith treat one another. I mean, the reason that Maul is even here is because his brother sought him out after he was betrayed by Asajj Ventress, who trained him only to get revenge on Count Dooku, who betrayed her because he was ordered to do so by Palpatine, who, as we all know, eventually betrays Count Dooku.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme, every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one.
It's a vicious cycle of masters offering young pupils great power, only for them to toss them aside when they aren't needed anymore. The difference for Maul, though, Maul never chose the dark side. On Dathomir, it's made very clear that his people are simply taken as apprentices as needed, practically sold into this cruel lifestyle by the Night Sisters. We've seen characters pledge themselves to the dark side before, but he had no other option. Maul was assured for his entire upbringing that he would be at his master's side when the Republic fell and the Sith ruled the galaxy. He lived for the recognition and approval of his master, and upon realizing that he was never meant for the greatness he imagined for himself, he lashed out in anger. He believes that revenge will satisfy that rage within him. Taking over Mandalore was a step toward vengeance on Kenobi, and when he finally has his enemy in a position of powerlessness, he takes it. Killing Satine, the love of Obi-Wan's life, is this rare moment where we see Maul totally on top. He has nearly had his victory. Like many great villains in fiction before him, he chooses to let his enemy suffer his loss. Obviously, this leads to Kenobi escaping, but the choice actually makes sense for Maul. He wants to cast Obi-Wan away after taking everything from him, letting him share the same fate that he did. At this moment, we see Maul finally feel fulfilled in his vengeance, but that acknowledgement that he sought from his master suddenly comes back to haunt him. While there's definitely an effort on Maul's part to act like his former master and intimidate his apprentice, asserting this dominance over him by instilling the same feeling of inferiority into Savage as Sidious did to him, I don't think Maul is truly like Palpatine at all. I do believe on some level that he does care for his brother. We see it in little flashes here and there, but the moment that truly confirms it for me sadly comes when it's way too late. When Sidious appears to personally deal with Maul on Mandalore, finally giving him his time after years of neglect, even having known he was resurrected before this episode and just acting like it was no big deal, he tells Maul that he is a rival to him now, and he takes Savage from him. This is the same episode where Maul murders Satine, by the way. I should feel no remorse for Maul losing his apprentice here after what he's done, but I can't help but feel for him here. This is the only person in the entire galaxy that Maul has had at his side, the only person he can turn to and confide in, someone who looks up to him, and Palpatine rips that from him. What seals the deal for me is that, despite calling him apprentice for the majority of the series, it's when he loses Savage that he calls him brother. I think the sadness that comes over Maul here as he holds his dying brother comes from the fact that Savage died believing that he was unworthy to be at Maul's side. Maul realizing all too late the harmful mentality that he's passed on to his brother from his old master. In a moment, all of that sadness turns to rage, and Maul's desire for revenge actually turns to Palpatine. But of course, he's no match for the Dark Lord of the Sith. There's a moment at the end of the duel where he begs Sidious for mercy, and it makes me think on another aspect of Maul's character. Despite all of his power and skill, Maul is pathetic. At his lowest points, he's reduced to cowering and fear. All of that confidence from his first appearance, gone in an instant. It's reflective of the first time we see him in the Clone Wars. At first, he appears to be a cybernetic monstrosity, but he's really just been reduced to a psychologically traumatized wild animal. Maul has suffered greatly. We've heard Yoda say that fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. Maul suffers at every turn for relying solely on his anger and hatred to get him through life. Despite constantly gloating about how powerful these emotions have made him, they only really leave him alone and broken. And in that, Maul fulfills another Star Wars mantra. I don't excuse the actions that Maul takes in regards to Obi-Wan or the innocent that he kills along his journey, but it's so hard not to have sympathy for Maul, especially when we see all that he's capable of. It makes you think about how things could have been if he had not been so blinded by his hate. The final season of the Clone Wars really hits for me emotionally on so many levels. We finally get to see Order 66 from the perspective of these characters that we've followed for so many seasons. It's an emotional ride, and at the center of it is Maul. Of all of the episodes where he appeared, it's my opinion that the best work that they did with him was done here. As is part of his character, Maul is ignored and cast aside, not only by Sidious after killing Savage and capturing Maul off screen, but even his archenemy Obi-Wan doesn't have time for him. This season takes place during the events of Revenge of the Sith. Greater things are in motion that Maul can't stop, but he's going to try. In this breathtaking sequence where Maul tries to appeal to Ahsoka to join him, shockingly we see Maul turn his desire for vengeance away from Kenobi, however briefly, and toward Sidious. He knows he can't beat him, but maybe he can deprive him of his next pupil, just as Sidious had done to him. We've seen this happen in Star Wars before. The villain asks for the hero to join them and they can achieve greatness. Where this scene feels different to me is, and I know some may disagree, but I think Maul means it. Maul at this point is fully aware that something big is about to go down, that the entire order of the galaxy is about to shift, and he is both in awe of the evil genius of it, but also terrified of where it will leave him once it's all said and done. He practically begs Ahsoka to join him so they can stop Sidious once and for all by removing the most vital player in his game from the equation. I've praised him already, but it needs to be brought up again right now. Sam Witwer, in this scene particularly, just crushes this performance. There's so much passion in every line delivery, and the things he says are kind of eye-opening, bringing to light some of the major criticisms of war and government that George had intended when he wrote the prequels.
Too late? For what? The Republic to fall? It already has, and you just can't see it. There is no justice, no law, no order, except for the one that will replace it.
The love that Ahsoka has for Anakin keeps her from accepting Maul's offer, and as George would write in his scripts,
a lot of they fight.
It's here I should mention Ray Park again. The animators did a great job throughout the series recapturing the speed and ferocity that he would bring to lightsaber combat, but for the final lightsaber duel of the Clone Wars, they decided to combine the efforts of the animators with the real thing. Ray Park had made a cameo appearance in Solo a few years before, and he came back one last time to provide motion capture for the battle with Ahsoka. So what we have here is the original Maul actor helping to bring the animator's vision to life combined with the powerful performance of Sam Witwer. It's Maul fully realized. When he turns his lightsaber on and strikes that pose, man, it felt like seeing the Phantom Menace again. And to think, the final lightsaber battle of the entire Clone Wars television series involves a character that they never intended to bring back at all. It's a testament to the writing that they were able to work him in so organically and connect him so well with the themes of the show. A show about people who fought and suffered for nothing. Neither side of this conflict won out in the end. The Separatists and the Republic both lost so that the Empire could rise. Ultimately, their own ambitions and reasons for fighting didn't matter. They were just a means to an end, just like Maul.
We were both tools for greater powers.
Maul fits so perfectly into the Clone Wars because Maul is the Clone Wars. Maul sees the writing on the wall, and after trying to gain something out of it, he desperately attempts to warn everyone about what's coming. But it's too late.
You're all going to burn! We're all going to die! You don't know what you're doing!
The events that end the Clone Wars happen, just as we've seen in Revenge of the Sith, but now more pieces are filled in. Just as we've witnessed the Jedi at the height of their powers, we see the last moments of Maul at his before he flees the chaos. What a contrast of how Maul appears in these final episodes of the Clone Wars to where we find him in Rebels. He's still Maul. The way that he effortlessly wipes out the Inquisitors who've been menacing our heroes the entire series reminds us of that level of skill that Maul has, but he's still become a shadow of his former self. He clings to the things that remind him of who he once was. His obsession with having an apprentice is still there, but I think it's evolved from this desire to simply be a master to another. I feel like this is his attempt to have a connection with someone again. Like having Ezra as his new apprentice might fill the void left by the death of Savage. There's this moment where Ezra asks Maul what side he's on, and while he immediately denies having been a Jedi, he doesn't exactly confirm that he was a Sith either.
The Sith took everything from me, ripped me from my mother's arms, murdered my brother, used me as a weapon, then cast me aside, abandoned me.
For me, this is Maul coming around to just what the ideology of the Sith took from him. Obviously, he won't reveal the whole truth to Ezra because he wants to earn his trust, but the way that Sam Witwer delivers these lines, it seems like he really means what he's saying. It's also a stark contrast to how quickly Maul would jump at the chance to announce himself and his brother as the true Sith in the Clone Wars. Maul isn't a Sith anymore. He's just an old man on a desolate planet looking for hope. Kinda like someone else we know. I think it's a good time to talk about him now. A good rivalry between characters works best when there's some similarities between the two. Obi-Wan and Maul have profoundly changed each other's lives when they crossed paths, both coming from completely different worlds, but not entirely without some things in common. They were both taken from their families when their power was first discovered. Obi-Wan has lost just about everything he cared for in his life due to the manipulation of Palpatine. Like Maul, he even lost a brother.
You were my brother, Anakin!
They were both warriors of great skill and potential that were forced into hiding after being used to advance a greater evil. Where they're different is the way that they handle the trauma that they've both been through. Obi-Wan always holds on to hope, even hoping that Anakin wasn't as far gone as he thought before confronting him and ultimately watching over Luke, the new hope for the galaxy that would convince Vader to turn back and restore balance. When it comes to Maul, he attempts to appeal to some small bit of humanity within him on Mandalore. He never set out to ruin Maul's life and doesn't want to chase him down across the galaxy out of revenge for Qui-Gon or even Satine. Obi-Wan doesn't hold on to hate. That's Maul. They've been through so much, but only Maul lets it consume him. When he thought Kenobi was dead after the events of Revenge of the Sith and the Empire's ascension, he was without any real purpose. For a while, he was in charge of a crime syndicate during the events of Solo, but at some point he was left stranded on Malachor, in the dark, alone. Having traveled there, of course, in search of a weapon that would grant him revenge on his enemies, which we can assume includes the now Emperor Palpatine. Once the events with Vader and Ahsoka transpire on Malachor, Maul escapes empty-handed and is again left aimless, until he finds out that Kenobi is alive on Tatooine.
Kenobi. Kenobi!
It all comes back to Kenobi. If anything, knowing he can't beat Vader, knowing he's not powerful enough to take on the Emperor, at the very least, he can take his long-awaited revenge on Obi-Wan Kenobi. The Twin Sons episode of Rebels is the finale to this rivalry that has now spanned decades. They've both grown old and tired, the scars of the past weighing heavily on both of them. Rather than leaping forward without a word into battle, they share a short dialogue, and it's a very sad thing to see Maul projecting so much of his pain onto Kenobi. Unable to move on, unable to see past his rage, Maul lets that rage out when Obi-Wan points out to him that he has nothing left, having only defined himself by his ability to take life. No matter how many people Maul kills, he's never going to gain anything from it. Nothing he won't immediately lose. Even if he kills Obi-Wan here, what would it bring him?
And what do you have?
I'd like to point out that the way I read this scene, I don't think Obi-Wan wants to fight Maul, and definitely doesn't want to kill him. I really believe that if Maul would have allowed him the chance to talk a little longer and appeal to him, he might have found some way to do so in another world. But Maul brought up Luke. He correctly guessed that Obi-Wan's new role was as a protector and forced Obi-Wan to act on that. Lightsaber battles are a major part of Star Wars. The climax of each of the main films typically revolves around a duel, and the prequel era ushered in a new style of fighting with crazy acrobatics, courtesy of Maul. When the world of Star Wars was animated, they could take that level of inhuman speed and accuracy to a whole other level. Animated lightsaber duels are among some of my favorites in the entire franchise. But what elevates a lightsaber duel to being an all-time great for me are the emotions that lie underneath each strike. It's one thing to show me great choreography, but another when you have me invested in both the characters performing it. Coming into this fight, we know that the creativity of the animators is limitless. We know that these characters are crazy skilled, and we also know that Obi-Wan has to make it out alive for the events of the series to continue. Going into this, I really didn't know what to expect, but what I got was one of the greatest lightsaber duels in Star Wars, and it only lasts a few seconds. The decision to have the fight be so short was one clearly made out of love for Star Wars with a clear understanding of its influences. George Lucas was a big fan of classic samurai films, where the outcome of duels were often decided by a few careful strokes. But even more importantly than a nod to the origins of Star Wars, the fight serves as a great visual storytelling experience. There is more going on here than just suspense being built as these two warriors stare at each other. Now, I am not the first person to point this out. Full Fat Videos did a fantastic video entirely about just this fight, and they go into way more depth than I'm going to go into here. And Sam Witwer himself has even spoken about the directing choices made in this scene at conventions. But in case you're not familiar with these details already, allow me to explain. The sequence begins with Kenobi taking his usual stance, one that we've seen many times before. We then see Maul prepare himself to battle Kenobi as he did throughout the Clone Wars. Then, for a brief moment, we see a nod to Alec Guinness's portrayal of the character in the original Star Wars before Obi-Wan changes his stance for a final time. He holds his lightsaber in the same exact pose as Qui-Gon did in The Phantom Menace. The reaction from Maul is interesting. It's like you can see him flashing back to that first duel with the Jedi. He remembers all those years ago the way that the great Jedi Master fought, and most importantly, he remembers how he defeated him. He adjusts accordingly. So many years later, and the memory of that fateful day is still fresh in his mind. If Obi-Wan fights like his master did, Maul knows how to beat him. What Maul doesn't realize is, just as he remembers every detail of the day that he lost everything, so does Obi-Wan. All those years of patience trump that blinding rage, and that same trick isn't going to work twice. Maul never stood a chance. Obi-Wan cradled his dying master in his arms, the same way he would the love of his life years later, and his archenemy years after that. It's poetic and tragic, but also kind of beautiful that in his final moments with his last words, Maul finally seems to let go of his hatred. As he dies, he chooses to hold on to the same hope that Obi-Wan has, that himself, Obi-Wan, and all those who suffered during the Clone Wars would someday be avenged.
He will avenge us.
When I saw this clip for the first time, after giving myself a few moments to reflect on it, it hit me that I was feeling such strong emotions over a character that before the expanded universe was only on screen for a few scenes with hardly any dialogue. It deserves to be praised just how good of a job the creators of the Clone Wars did in bringing this character back, and how well those who worked on Rebels brought this story to such a beautiful end. That's really what this video is. It's a celebration of one of the best examples of bringing a character back from the dead and doing it right. Maul may be one of the best ever, but he is just one of the many examples of amazing characters introduced or expanded upon in these shows. If you're a fan and haven't taken the time to watch Clone Wars, Rebels, or Bad Batch, please do so. It is worth your time, I promise. Thank you so much for watching, and may the Force be with you.